Let's go to this conversation now. The University of Stellenbosch has launched an initiative called the Stellenbosch Dialogue. The initiative seeks to address at least 4 of the 10 critical actions highlighted in the National Development Plan for 2030. The 4 actions are economic growth, crime reduction, education and counter-corruption. For more on this, we are joined by Professor Geo Quinot. He is from the Stellenbosch University. He is the professor in public law. He's also a member of the Pavocat-Stellenbosch Academy board. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Let's just first talk about these dialogues. A lot of people, when they hear the word dialogue, they're thinking it's going to be a talk shop that will have recommendations, but nothing will ever be implemented. Talk to us about these dialogues and what they aim to achieve.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I mean, our main objective is really to help coordinate all the efforts that are already ongoing to raise levels of integrity to deal with corruption. And what we hope to achieve is based on experiences elsewhere in the world where similar dialogues have been established to have leaders commit to an annual event. So annually, high-level representatives from various organizations, governments, but also civil society, business, academia, international organizations would come together and review what's happened over the last 12 months and then commit to the next 12 months going forward. And that process is an iterative one. And one hopes that by adopting that kind of methodology, one can move beyond just having talk shops. Because remember, we need to talk to each other, right? There's no other way of doing it. How are we going to find each other as a community if we don't talk? But as you rightly point out, it doesn't help if we just stop by talking. And that is usually the danger of a once-off ad hoc conversation. So the idea behind the dialogue is really to have an ongoing conversation, not in an ad hoc way, but on an annual basis. And that is what we're really trying to achieve with this initiative.
And who will be at the table to take part in these conversations?
Well, we hope to have the highest levels of representations, right? So we hope to have the South African government, led hopefully by our president, joined by other heads of state from around the continent, and then also civil society leaders, business leaders, academia, and international organizations. One would also hope to have foreign leaders from beyond our continent who can contribute and assist us in these endeavors to join us in that conversation, and then all their representatives also to be at the table. So the hope really is to have the highest level of decision-making represented at the table. Again, drawing on experience elsewhere, we've seen that these kind of events then become very important sites where these leaders can also, as a way of bilateral conversations, engage each other, and much can be achieved in a short period of time by bringing everyone together in one forum.
And I see one of the things that you are touching on in these dialogues is the National Development Plan. And if I can borrow from that blueprint, it says that the NDP aims to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by 2030. And it also continues to say that South Africa can realize these goals by drawing on the energies of its people, growing an inclusive economy, building capabilities, enhancing the capacity of the state, etc. When you look at what has happened over the years and the amount of money that has been lost to corruption, the corruption has really derailed the plan and the vision of the NDP.
Absolutely. You are spot on that. We are saying this is a prerequisite. Dealing with corruption in an effective way and getting to a point where we've got integrity in decision-making and how just resources, for example, are being allocated, how plans are designed and then implemented. Those are prerequisites for any form of development, as we've put it for ourselves in our development plan. And then, of course, we're also talking beyond just the South African National Development Plan. We're talking about continental development, because we can't have the kind of development that we would like to see in South Africa if we ignore our neighbors, if we ignore our fellow Africans on the rest of the continent. So our goal really is to say, if we do not deal with corruption now, it is going to continually undermine our developmental efforts. So it is really a prerequisite to achieve all those developmental objectives that we've set for ourselves.
And I wonder, how important is it going to be as part of the conversation then to put on the table mechanisms that can prevent corruption? Because what we're also seeing quite a lot over the years is that it's only reported after the fact, and it's difficult to then recoup the monies and all of that. But it's going to be important for the systems to digitize more and be able to detect corruption even before it actually is carried out.
Absolutely correct. And this is where a university and academia broadly can, of course, play a leading role. This is where we can really make a difference by bringing new tools, new mechanisms to the table and say, look, based on the research that we've done, we can suggest that the following mechanisms can be implemented. And then also when a solution has been conceptualized, to make that solution a reality by way of systems, for example, universities can play a leading role in assisting the public sector to put those systems into place so that one can, as you say, not have to wait for the mistake to be made and then try to rectify it after the fact, but have a system of decision-making and implementation where mistakes are not made, where transparency, for example, is of such a nature that one can keep track exactly of how money flows are being implemented. And there are many examples on our own continent. There are great examples of systems like this put in place. As you'll know, procurement, for example, has been one of our really weak links in South Africa. And yet there are countries in Africa that's made tremendous strides in putting e-procurement systems in place that's been very effective to bring higher levels of integrity to bear on their procurement. And we should learn from those. So one would hope that conversations like this would enable us not to have to reinvent the wheel, where we have to, implement new systems, but rather to draw on experiences like those of the Kenyans and say, how can we learn from you? How can we use the system you've already got operating to also work for us in South Africa and in any other state? And that is where we see the strength of these kind of dialogues to really come through.
And one of the, the objectives when you really look and go through the NDP is that while it admits that the progress is going to be made over time and it's important for the progress to then be monitored, there's three priorities that stand out. And I see that you've also taken them on board as a part of what you need to achieve here. And that's raising employment through faster economic growth, improving the quality of education, skills development and innovation, and also building the capability of the state to play a developmental transformative role. One of the things that we've seen in recent times, especially this year, has been just how bad it's been on the employment front, coupled with COVID-19 and also businesses finding themselves crumbling. I wonder when, you look at some of these solutions here for faster economic growth in order to try and really boost the South African economy, where are you looking to draw those inferences from? And also, what would you put on the table as part of these dialogues?
Well, firstly, I think one of the things that we absolutely must do is to make sure that every single rand we spend towards all of these efforts is effectively spent, right? We cannot afford in this country to have any mechanisms aimed at addressing all of those challenges that you've just highlighted, that money is not returning maximum dividends for us. So I think that's a first important point. And if we can't get to that point where the money that we are putting into supporting small businesses, supporting capacity development, youth employment programs, internships, etc., if that money is not generating maximum results, it's not money well spent. So firstly, in designing the programs, we need to have a good idea of what the impact is going to be. That, for example, would require us to have good data analysis so that we can do scenario planning around implementation programs. But also then when we start to implement an actual program, we should have monitoring and evaluation systems in place so that we can firstly make sure the money flows to where it should flow. There's no wastage in the system. But also on an ongoing basis, we can monitor the return we're getting on a particular plan so that we can very quickly say, this plan is not working. Let's stop, right? Let's revisit, let's redesign, let's adjust. And I think those are exactly the kind of programs, the kind of initiatives that we would like to assist. And again, as I've said before, not reinventing the wheel. Too often, we think that we are unique. We're the only country that's got these problems. We're not, right? We've got problems like any other country. Let's not try and reinvent the wheel. Let's learn from experiences. This is exactly where we think having a continental conversation is so important. Because I don't think, for example, it is particularly helpful for us to try and borrow from the Northern Hemisphere and think that those solutions are going to work for us, because we've got a different context. We should be looking to our neighbors on our own continent and see where they've got it right, and then replicate those programs here.
And listening to what you're saying then, because we are not a country that's short of policies or dialogues or anything, but implementation becomes the nub of the issue here, especially also when you look at some of the critical points and the actions that the NDP calls for. Part of it is that we need to professionalize the public service, strengthen accountability, improve coordination, and also prosecute corruption. That is also going to be important, because for money to then be freed and spent properly for all these other areas of education, of crime reduction and growing the economy, it's going to be important to hold people to account.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is where, firstly, having accountability mechanisms are important, but also it's not fair to try and hold people to account for the successes or failures if you've not provided them with the necessary capacity. So capacity development of administrators tasked with implementing these programs then become critical. And again, as academia, this is where we can make a real contribution. So what we would hope to do is to be able, from these dialogues, to identify where the critical capacity shortages are, and then to design targeted programs of capacity building that could assist in building the ability of those skills of those administrators to really be as well capacitated as is possible in order to deliver on their mandate. And I think this is a key part of any solution that we're going to put on the table to drive development, to get maximum return on investment, is to have capacity in the right place at the right level. And one would hope through an initiative like this that we can identify what are the kind of fit for purpose capacity development programs that we should be implementing as academia. And I'm not just talking about Stellenbosch University. Of course, we are spearheading this particular initiative, but one would hope that all other universities, all other higher education institutions in this country would join us in this conversation, so that collectively we can help build the kind of capacity we need in the South African public sector.
All right, thank you so much for that. That was the Professor in Public Law at the Stellenbosch University, Professor Geo Quinot.